What is up, and welcome to the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast. I am Shane Jackson, and joined with me today is Ryan Kramer of the Sports Gambling Podcast. Very excited to have Ryan on and all the stuff that he does for the Sports Gambling Podcast. Ryan, how are you doing?
Great to be here. Always happy to talk NFL football. It's already week 5. I love where we're at that point, the quarter pull, where we start looking around and saying, "Oh man, we're a quarter of the way done." Football. Holidays must be close. We got to make sure we relish in this. Let's go another week to make some money.
Yes, the plan is to try to make some money. We will preview some of the Week 5 slate, some of the games that we like to bet on, some of the games that we want to talk about, and all that jazz. But first, can you explain where everybody can find your work and what you're doing in the Sports Gambling Podcast? I saw a tweet a couple of days ago that the Sports Gambling Podcast is undefeated through the NFL season. I mean, how is that even possible?
Undefeated, yeah. So it's been a good start. We've been growing, which is great. We're having more and more people listen, but really, first time ever in sports gambling podcast history that I am undefeated 8-0 on my lock. Sean is undefeated 4-0 on his dogs this deep into a season. So we're kind of enjoying it. Sean's more of a juju guy, so we're trying to tiptoe around the not screwing that up. But it's been like, honestly, when you're hot, and it feels like you can't do anything wrong. But I'm gonna blame, aka give credit to, the countless hours of team previews and everything else we did in the offseason. I feel like I'm more dialed in than I have been since the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to scoff at for the undefeated record, though. I mean, anytime you can win this many in a row, whether it's the beginning of the season or not, I mean, it's pretty impressive. But it has to feel especially impressive to start the year this way, because really, you're already playing with house money a little bit.
You know how it is in the content game. Like it's important. You start fast, and it validates everything. And oh, by the way, bankroll is doing pretty good too.
Love to see it. Love to hear it. Love to see it. Would recommend following Ryan Kramer at Kramer-centric and doing the Sports Gambling Podcast in general. They crank out a lot of content and a lot of different leagues and sports that you can follow through their avenue. But let's start off with the Thursday Night Football game. Not exactly a super exciting one, but we will watch it nonetheless on Amazon Prime and catch that all 22 broadcast. Colts, Broncos. I won't make you give out a pick for every game because we will make sure to keep that perfect record intact. But what do you think? How do you think this game's going to unfold? And if you had a bet on this game, what would it be?
Yeah, first of all, that's kind of our mantra. I'm never afraid to make a pick. I'm not a guy who's going to give you a lean. I'm going to give you a pick. And honestly, this is one of the games I love this week. Whether it's 3.5, I think we're just seeing a beautiful convergence of this Denver team, which is, they're lost. They're looking to find their way. Critical injury sounds bad on the surface. They lose Javonte Williams. What I see is an opportunity. Let's maybe step away from the running game and let's just see what this passing game looks like. Let Russ cook. And oh, by the way, you got the Colts coming to town, ranked 27th in DVOA pass defense. It's a great matchup. Oh, and Jonathan Taylor's out, and they've been a bad running team even with him. And oh, by the way, that Matt Ryan sack that we all laughed at last week when he looked like a rag doll, that was Quentin Nelson getting beat one-on-one. I have serious problems and concerns around this Colts team and their ability to travel here on the short week. Even though it's the public side, I'm all over the Denver Broncos here laying the 3 points.
Yeah, the public part never scares me a little bit at all, really. I mean, the public's going to win at times, too. We just saw this last weekend. Sportsbooks admitted to having a losing day for the first time all year, and we all feel really bad for them. But that meant the public won. And so it's never a bad thing to be on the public for a given game. I didn't feel great about the side. I do like your conviction, though. I ended up going with the under earlier in the week. Still like it right now. It feels almost too easy in the sense that I projected it to be around 39 points. I don't know why it's this high. Both these teams have had one game where they've reached the 40-point threshold. Both these teams are making the Iowa Hawkeyes seem explosive on offense to some extent. I mean, it's bad. Their starting running backs are injured. And these quarterbacks in a new system aren't delivering. And so I don't know. I attack the under. I feel pretty confident about it. The market's moved in my favor. But now with that, it always feels like, hey, maybe you got a couple bad offenses and that leads to short field position, and maybe that leads to an over. Because I feel like a couple weeks ago on Thursday Night Football, we felt the same about the Steelers and the Browns. with an under, and that led to an over. So, but I am riding with the under. That was one of my picks for the week, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, I just think in general, kind of a macro take here. I think I'm still bought into the idea that scoring will be depressed on Thursday. And unlike last week, where it was more of a tired legs angle with that Miami defense, I do think that both of these teams are at least competent at stopping the run, and neither offense has looked electric passing the ball. So to your point, unless we catch some pick sixes in our way, I like the Colts team total under too, if you want to add to the card.
I'm always game to add to the card. I do not have a record to maintain, so definitely on board with adding more bets. That would be one I look into. Let's move to Sunday. Anywhere you want to start, you get the whole board. What's one of your favorite games to attack this weekend?
You know what? I'll go right to a game that I circled back in May when we first started evaluating the schedule, and it was this Buffalo Bills spot ahead of Kansas City. They have the Chiefs on deck. I get it. The Pittsburgh Steelers came to Buffalo and beat them last year, so maybe revenge is on their mind. But I have a feeling if you go survey 10 Bills fans, the majority of them are thinking about that loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. And so I circled this game way back when. In some ways, I love the convergence of situations where you have the rookie quarterback coming in, even giving us more line value. We saw the look ahead at 13. It's now stretched up to 14. It's Mike Tomlin as a dog. It's Mike Tomlin who coaches a team that shows up and plays every week. And quite frankly, it's 14 points in the NFL. I understand the Bills have been really good at covering big spreads. And I'm kind of spitting in the face of that right here because I do think this is the ultimate. I don't even want to call it a sandwich spot, but you think about what the Bills have done recently. They went down to Miami. They played all those plays, heartbreaking loss. They go down to Buffalo. Josh Allen looks like old Josh Allen. They recover in the second half, play a great second half all the way to the end. They get the win. There's some emotional, we'll call it inertia being poured out in these games. And now you have this flat spot at home, early kick, where you're playing a Steelers team that you're 14-point favored over. And now you have Kansas City on deck. So I'm a situational guy. I love to lean into these situational spots. And then you give me the Mike Tomlin team's going to have a little bump because the backup's in and everyone's going to want to play a little bit better. I love taking the 14 points here. It's one of the picks I gave out on the Sports Gambling Podcast as a lock this week. So I'm all over Pittsburgh catching the 14.
Well, I don't mean to every time you give out a side, I like the total, but this is one of the totals that I had as well. And for a lot of the same reasons that you were kind of pointing to, I'm on the under here. While I don't, that would lean towards, I guess, taking the points, being okay with taking a point in a total that I expect to be a little bit lower than what it's projected to be. But situational is part of this, right? Like if there was ever a time for a team to look ahead, to play vanilla on offense and do that, it's the Bills right now in this situation of being a 2-touchdown favorite against a rookie quarterback with the Chiefs on deck. Like I feel like at some point they just call off the dogs and call it a day. And I'm willing to bet on that from an under standpoint, but I think that is a similar argument for the spread as well. And people, may remember this, but the Steelers went into Buffalo and won in week 1 of last year with Ben Roethlisberger and the corpse that was Ben Roethlisberger. So I don't hate the idea of backing the Steelers in that big of a spread because you're right. We just don't see those type of spreads in the NFL. And it feels like, I don't know, we're playing with fire if you want to lay with the Buffalo Bills. But because of all that, I'm more confident in the under.
Fun fact, it's the largest spread in Steelers history as a dog. The second largest was them versus the Cowboys in the Super Bowl, a game they were catching 13.5. And guess what? They only lost by 10, so they covered the spread.
Oh, that is a fun fact. And also just, like you mentioned, backing Mike Tomlin as an underdog. It's hard not to like those type of situations. A situation that I like that I'm very curious about your thoughts of it, because I kind of feel like maybe I'm stepping on an island here, but I'm taking the Rams this week. I bet a -4.5. They're 5.5 now. I would take 5.5 as well because I make it 6. I think the Rams, every time they've stepped up in class, we've seen them show their weaknesses. But every time they've stepped down, they've seemed to take care of business against inferior opponents. I consider the current version of the Cowboys a step down from what I believe the Rams are. And I think, I don't know if how much truth there is to it, right? But the rumblings that maybe there's a quarterback controversy and all that will be put to rest in a performance like this when going against the Aaron led Rams defense. I just feel like if this is a perfect situation for the Rams to get right, they have the Cowboys this week, they have the Panthers next week, and then they have the bye. So they could be sitting 4-2 heading into the bye, and all of a sudden we're not worried about a Super Bowl hangover anymore. If they lose this week or kind of look vulnerable again this week, I think then you start to worry. But I don't know how bold of a take it is to back the Super Bowl champs, but I'm taking the Rams this week after what we just saw like 5 days ago.
They've looked pretty bad. So, it's not – I think a lot of people will see this line and be like, well, wait a second. Dallas, they can play some defense. They can intercept Matt Stafford. Here's what I would say. Matt Stafford has – or I shouldn't say Matt Stafford. The Rams have thrown a pick six against the Niners the last 4 years. So that just happened. We all saw it on national television. Also a game that Shanahan just owns McVay. So we kind of saw a spotlight shined on a Ram team that just – they never performed well in that spot. And while – I am a believer in the hangover, I do think there are concerns about Stafford. One of the things we gave out on the Sports Gambling Podcast before the year was Stafford to lead the league in interceptions. Looking pretty good as, hopefully he doesn't lose the job, but he's slinging it. And I loved your point earlier about the gatekeeper nature of this team. They seem to be able to play down well, but when they've played up so far, they just haven't shown up. And it's been the lack of that second target that to me is really holding them back in this spot. As someone who loves to see the situations and loves to see just straight up the market, not knowing what's going on, that's what a 5-point spread is. They're confused, and they know the public is going to bet the Cowboys here, even though the Rams won the Super Bowl. And so to me, I think this has the opportunity to go up to 7. I also will say this, like conspiracy theorist me, I don't think the Cowboys players liked what Jerry Jones said about a controversy, because I think the players really like Dak. Now, if there was ever a time to maybe Cooper Rush needs to not have an amazing game, it's against Aaron Donald. I don't know. It feels a little bit of a stretch, but to your point, I'm just not looking to back this Dallas Cowboys. Feels like they've kind of been riding high, playing a lot of gimmicky type offense, and the defense has been playing really well. I want to see Diggs do it against Cooper Kupp this week, but I'm laying the points. I think Stafford and the boys, like you said, they roll.
Love it when you're on the same side as me. Then I will take that. Always game for any tinfoil hat theories as well. So like those points. Anywhere else on the board? Is there any other game that's jumping out to you that you're betting or looking to watch?
Well, I mean, how can we not talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Atlanta Falcons? Atlanta, a team that I was super high on coming into the season. They're 4-0 against the spread. They have done better as well. Now you have Tampa. Tom Brady, is he getting a divorce? I don't know if you saw this, but he replaced the picture of him and his family with him and his offensive line. Again, tinfoil hat, but if I see a dude replace a picture of his wife with his offensive line, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is the Tom Brady laser focus we needed. Things are out in the open, the weight's off his chest, and love fading 4-0 against the spread teams historically. It's just a great spot. And I'll give you one more. This is the second largest spread of a team who is 4-0 against the spread. And if you look even further, there's only been 3 occurrences in the last 20 years where it's 6 points or more. The other 2, they got their ass kicked. So I guess what I'm saying is Tom Brady's going to be focused. We saw it a little bit last week, and the score didn't indicate it with Kansas City because that weird way the game started. Kansas City actually had a yards per play deficit to the Bucs. And you saw Tom Brady. He led the league in passing yards that week. So I think Godwin healthy, Evans back, Julio's running around a little bit. I think this could be an absolute showout game. And what have we said and seen from this Falcons team? Very efficient running the ball. Got to wonder what happens when they finally run up to a team that can stop the run. I think that's that matchup, and I think this one could get ugly. I like this kind of rolls like 38-10, kind of falls off the tongue nicely. I like a blowout here, so I'm going to lay the points. Especially love getting Tampa into my teasers as long as we're teasing it down from 8.5 to 2.5.
Yeah, and the Bucs are getting healthier as the season goes on. It's always been clear that, hey, the best version of the Bucs is not going to be September. It's going to be in January. But if their health seems to be trending in the right direction, and like you mentioned, the Falcons being 4-0 against the spread might make bettors jump to them, but odds makers see that too, right? They adjust their expectations on the team, and these numbers will move. I mean, teams, generally speaking, will lose a handful of times against the spread, even the best of teams throughout the year. as like the Lions last year, right? They won bettors a lot of money, but they were still 10-7 against the spread, or 11-6, something like that. So I do agree. I've adjusted the Falcons to maybe being one of the best of the bad teams, but I'm not ready to say that they can throw some punches with the Bucs this week.
Don't get me wrong, I would love it. One of my
Yeah.
long shot stupid parlays before the year, I took the Giants, I took the Falcons, and I took the Texans. I parlayed them, and I put $100 to win 72,000 that they all win the division. I also bet the Falcons aside, and this is a game for the division lead. I just, unfortunately, as much as I love them, and now it looks like Kyle Pitts could be out. They're just deficient in like shootout capable play, and so I don't think they'll be able to keep up.
I think we have to talk about the Sunday night football game. It feels like one of the better games on this slate, and really one of the more important games on the slate. AFC North is pretty competitive early in the year, but this could be a big game for that race. We got the Baltimore Ravens going against the Cincinnati Bengals, and I actually did take Cincinnati +3. I understand there's smart bettors on the other side. My thought process in this matchup is that, point to obviously Cincinnati blowing out Baltimore in both meetings last year, but I think there's some sort of matchup advantage for them in that the Ravens don't seem to create a whole lot of pressure up front. And Joe Burrow, he does get sacked a lot, but he doesn't seem to get much pressure in a matchup like this. Therefore, he's able to get the ball out to his talented playmakers and let them do damage after the catch, as we saw in multiple wins over the Baltimore Ravens last year. And so that's my thought process this week, is that even though the Ravens are healthier than they were last year, it's still the same concern to me that I don't know how much they're going to actually get in Joe Burrow's face. And honestly, this Ravens secondary, while it's healthier now, it's still giving up a lot of yards. We saw Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle kind of torch this secondary in that Dolphins game. And I understand the Ravens have only trailed for less than 30 seconds on the season, or somehow 2-2, and this feels like a chance to maybe buy low at home on Sunday Night Football. But I think there are problems with this team, and similar to the Bucs, I've always thought the Ravens were going to be better later in the year than they are now because they're still getting their legs underneath them, and I just don't think this is a matchup that favors them. So I'm willing to take Cincinnati +3 because I think they win outright.
It's funny how we like to frame our stats for what we're trying to convince people of, right? Like, wow, the Cardinals have only led for X amount of minutes on the season, and yet they're 2-2. They're lucky to be 2-2. But yet when we flip that around, it's like, I don't know how to receive that. Yeah, they blew some games, but they also have looked electric in most of their quarters. Essentially, you remove 2 of those quarters of play, 2 of the 16 quarters, and they've been one of the most dominant teams in the league. And I think what it's created is a little bit of a discount. I think it's created a discount for the Ravens, which is why you're seeing people bet it from 3 to 3.5. And I think also this is very public. It's very, whether it's fantasy football influence, it's very public to say, oh, wow, Joe Burrow put up 41 points in both matchups last year against this team. And they're having some of the same problems this year in terms of letting explosive plays happen. I would remind you that one of those matchups featured Josh Johnson. The other matchup was 17-13 in the third quarter, and Lamar Jackson left that game early, if you remember. So I think there's a little bit of like jokingly keep saying on the sports gambling podcast that Lamar is in contract negotiations right now. And this is a big time contract negotiation game for him. He understands that this team embarrassed him. They're rolling out the All Blacks on in prime time. And for me, what this is I think, like, to my very first point, I think we're getting a discount on a team that has just looked electric. And much like we discussed with the Falcons and the Bucs, we don't trust the Falcons to keep up in a shootout. The way the current Joe Burrow-led Bengals offense is playing, they can't keep up in a shootout with anyone either. And so that's kind of my angle. I think this could be a game where Baltimore gets up once again. We love Baltimore in the first half. And maybe Joe Burrow leads them back. I just haven't seen it yet from that offense. So until I see it, I'm not going to buy it. Buyer beware. Good luck to you. I guess I shouldn't say good luck because I'm laying the 3.5 on the Ravens.
Well, full disclosure, I grew up rooting for the Ravens. Therefore, I am comfortable if the Ravens actually take care of business and your bet cashes. Very much happier in that scenario. So
I love that emotional hedge bet.
Yeah. Before we close out of here, any other games that caught your eye? Anything that you're watching on Sunday before we dip out?
All right, we'll talk about one that a fun way to make a couple bucks. The Houston Texans have not been a good team. They are the only winless team in the National Football League, and they are taking on the Jags. The Jags, you wouldn't believe it. In the last 33 games, they've only been favored now 3 times. in those other 2 times, they lost the game by multiple touchdowns. So what am I telling you to do? Take the Houston Texans on the money line. This Jags team, I understand why we're optimistic about them. I think there's an actual letdown spot coming after that trip to Philly. I think the team did get up for Doug P because they like him, and that meant something to Doug P. And quite frankly, I think you're spray painting a turd to think that Jacksonville did well in Philly. I thought they were gifted a chance to do something in that game, and they just completely vanished. And I think Houston, I've been watching a lot of the media availability, and these players are embarrassed that they're the only team that doesn't have a dub. Feel like they've played good enough to win some games. So while the injury report and the length of it scares me a little bit, I'm going to be on the +7, but I'm also going to be on the money line here, +260 on the Houston Texans.
Listen, I understand that you're supposed to, in sports betting, take your emotions and opinions out of it, and you're supposed to bet numbers, not teams. But you're a braver man than me for putting actual dollars on the Houston Texans this week. But I don't hate the call. Like, I think there is somewhat of value on the spread. It's just you are braver than me. That's maybe why you're doing so well in the NFL.
Scared money don't make money, man.
Exactly. Before we close out, remind people where they can find your work, Ryan.
Yeah, check out the Sports Gambling Podcast anywhere you listen to your podcast audio, and anything on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network with 30 shows covering every single sport you could ever imagine, from disc league to Canadian football to Formula One.
That's awesome. He is Ryan Kramer. Thank you so much for joining us today. For Ryan, I'm Shane Jackson. Thank you for listening to the Bet Chicago Sports Podcast, and see you tomorrow as we preview the Bears-Vikings matchup with Sean Hammond. See you then.